This is BoomerLife on CL650.
My endless
This is BoomerLife on CL650. I'm Joanne Sutton, and today's show, we're tackling the subject of end of life. This important conversation starts now with the help of our friends from the Alzheimer's Society of BC. And Maria Howard, the CEO, has joined us. She's here to help. And we also welcome by telephone our first guest. This is Dave Obey. So let me just say thanks for joining us today, Dave.
No problem.
Dave is the editor-in-chief of the Times columnist newspaper in Victoria. He's no stranger to the Alzheimer's Society of BC. He's been an advocate and a guest speaker at some of their events, and the reason being his very personal connection to the disease. Dave had not one parent diagnosed with Alzheimer's, but both parents. Now, Dave, I'm not certain where you would start this conversation, but what can you actually share with us now about your experience?
I can share just about anything. Both parents, as I say, were diagnosed, and they sort of went in different paths to a certain extent. Alzheimer's is not just one disease. It can sort of take different shapes and forms and so on. So how my dad dealt with it was quite different than how my mother faced it. Both are now dead. My dad died in 2012. My mother died 3 weeks ago, and with my father, it was. He just became less and less able to converse. What he said made less sense, that kind of thing. But he would still keep on. He was still active, and he was still doing things with help. Obviously, he was able to go for a walk, able to feed himself, that kind of thing. My mother was quite different for the past, say, 6 months of her life. She could do pretty much nothing. It was very, very clear that she was in sort of the final stages, but that final stage lasted a long, long time. I think that the last words that she spoke were probably about 6 months before she died, and before that it was just 1 or 2 words at a time. But all of that said, it's still possible to relate to people with dementia. I could still talk with Dad. We could talk, very, very simple things. Ask how he was doing. Talk about the weather, whatever, and he would converse. With my mother, there was no conversation at the end, but there are small things that a person can do to relate, and one of them, of course, is just holding hands, hugging them, whispering in their ear, that kind of thing. When I whispered in her ear, there might be no connection whatsoever. There might be nothing obvious to an observer. But at the same time, I was holding her hand, and I could feel a difference in her hand as I spoke with her. And it's just a matter of sort of dealing with different things like that, and knowing that connection doesn't have to be sort of verbal. One thing I think that I saw a lot when I was going into the care units, people would come in and would say, "Do you remember such and such? Do you remember this? Do you remember that?" Which I think is about the worst thing you can do in a case like that, because you're dealing with people who have memory issues, and so why put them on that kind of a test? I think it's better to just simply tell them things, talk about family, show them photographs of family, whatever, and connect on that level. It can be done.
Mm-hmm. Rather than correct their mistakes when they can't remember somebody or call somebody the wrong name. Yeah, very good example, Dave. Now, let's take us back a little bit, maybe to the time when they were diagnosed. Did it happen at the same time? Was it a couple of years apart? And tell us some of the conversations you might have had back then.
Yeah, it doesn't start with a diagnosis. I think if a family doesn't know that there's an issue until a diagnosis, that means the family hasn't been paying attention. I think it's very important that people deal with their parents or whoever it is, their loved ones, whatever, and we can see the changes in them. I saw problems with memory. I saw problems with my dad doing things that made no sense to me. Like, why would an 85-year-old man need to go to the drugs or to the store and buy 3 pairs of tin snips? It made no sense. And then he would talk about them, and I said, "Why did you do that?" And he said, "Well, it was a good price. What was I supposed to do?" And so on and so on. And but at the same time, my mother was pointing out problems that Dad was having. I was seeing problems that Mom was having. So in the end, between my sisters and I, we got them to doctors, and we had them tested. And in some cases, The tests I don't think made any sense necessarily, because one example was they asked Dad what his address was, and how would he know? Why would it matter to him? He was living in an apartment. He knew how to find the apartment. He didn't know the precise address, but what did that matter? That said, I believe there were other sort of tests that they could have done that would have also found that he had major issues with memory, that kind of thing. I talked with Dad about it. He understood that he was having major issues. He understood what it meant, and we had to talk with Mom as well, because Mom kept saying that Dad was having issues, and between my sister and I, we had to tell her, well, actually, Mom, you've got them too, and they both accepted it, which I think was quite remarkable. They both accepted it and knew at that point that okay, maybe they won't be so frustrated at things anymore. But they would still do things like plan to go. They were living in Calgary, and they would plan to go for a walk for a pizza, and they'd give an address in Edmonton, that kind of thing.
Okay. So if you were obviously very involved with the care and the conversations with your parents, right, along the way, and you must have had that conversation about end of life at some point, or how did they see, living out their last years? Could you tell us a little bit about that conversation? Well,
there were quite different conversations with my mother. She simply didn't want to talk to it. She said that God would take care of it, and that was that. My father was quite different. He asked me, starting even 20 years ago, he said to me that if he ever sort of reached a certain level in terms of needing care, he wanted me to end his life, and I agreed. Because when you're talking about something well in the future and theoretical and so on, sure, whatever you want, but it actually gets tougher. I remember that conversation a lot, or those conversations, because he said that several times. I remember that a lot because as I would see the decline, they were in Calgary. I would visit once a month, and I did that for about 8 years. I would see the decline in both of them. I would see Dad was sort of declining faster or farther, that kind of thing. But you always think there's going to be one more good day. This might just be a bad day. I might see him on an off day. There might be a good day coming. So again, you're never to the point where you think that gee, now is the time. But beyond that, can a person really do that? And that's the whole thought of like assisted dying and so on. I'm not sure I could even do that.
Although you agreed to, because that was your father's wishes.
That was my father's wishes, and I said yes. But when the time comes, as I say, it's a matter of life and death, and it's a very, very tough decision to make. And in the end, I just felt the time wasn't right. I couldn't do it, and I'm not sure I could ever reach that point where I could do it.
So how did you handle that emotional fallout for yourself, or how did you handle arranging all your parents' affairs?
Well, that was between myself and my sisters. I've got a couple of sisters who were also heavily involved in this. We kept in constant communication about the state of our parents, and moved them. They had an apartment of their own. We convinced them that they had to get out of that, moved them into a place with a bit of assisted living, and they were very, very quickly kicked out of there. We had to find out another space very quickly.
Because their needs were greater, or
their needs were far greater. When they were living on their own, they could hide things better.
Sure.
And we wouldn't hear about things necessarily. But now that they were in an assisted living place, we had staff there telling us, "Did you know this, this, and this?" Or, your mother went missing, we couldn't find her, that kind of thing. They found Dad one day in a snowstorm sitting outside with a light sweater on. He was just sitting in a park about 2 blocks away, not sure how to get back home, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so things like that. We moved them from place to place to place, and did more and more looking after them. And my one sister visited them every day, just to make sure that their needs were being met. But it's also difficult to see that kind of thing happen, and I think the one frustration was sort of the pain of seeing that. Even after my father died, we had a service for my father, and half an hour later, chatting with my mom, she said that Dad was downstairs getting coffee. He'd be right back. So and that is tough to deal with, because I'm dealing with the fact that I just dealt with a service for my father at the same time, the same disease, taking my mother.
So, Dave, what sort of support services or resources did you reach out for? Obviously, you made contact with the Alzheimer's Society.
Yes, to a limited extent. My sister did more of that because she was on the ground. And I honestly think that, I think looking back at it now, I should have done more of that as well. I relied too much on siblings as opposed to getting direct help myself. And there are things that I wish I'd realized, like I would get frustrated with my parents for one thing or another, and you realize after the fact that there was no need to do that. There's no gain in doing that. Don't get mad at them. Don't just correct them and move on, or agree with them and move on, whatever it takes. That kind of thing I could have heard more of. And I think that everybody in this situation should actually get some help of some sort. Talk to people who know about this stuff, because we're going into this, like as the kids of parents with Alzheimer's, we go into this with no training whatsoever. We don't know what we're doing. It's the same as being a parent for the first time. Like you've got a hunch what to do, but you really don't know what to do about this. We don't go golfing without taking lessons. We don't go driving without taking lessons. So why would we turn down help when it comes to a matter of helping our parents? I think in hindsight, I should have done a lot more in terms of getting information, advice, assistance, whatever it would have been.
And what about having some different conversations with your parents earlier rather than later when you might have been in crisis mode?
I'm not sure that there much more could have been done on that. Looking back at it, I think we had the conversations. I'm satisfied with those conversations. When my mother wouldn't talk about it anyway, so that was pretty much that. I couldn't lure her into that conversation. But she was much more, as I say, she thought it was in God's hands to let that happen, and that was going to be that. So the bigger conversations I should have had, or we could have had, with the siblings, with my sisters, to get so we were all on the same page about what was happening, to make sure that everyone was fully aware and agreeing on the situation. I think that's one place where parents or families can sort of break apart to a certain extent. It hasn't happened that much in my family, but in other families it certainly has. I've seen it. Another thing that really would have been tough to do, and this will sound selfish or whatever, but things like family heirlooms and possessions and so on, they disappeared. And things that I wanted to leave with my parents, I want that item, I want that photo album at some point, but I didn't ask for it. I assumed I would get it after the fact. But the thing is, my mother, when she was suffering from Alzheimer's, one day decided to throw it away, and a lot of things like that just simply disappeared because she would look around and say, "What is this for? I don't know. I'll throw it in the garbage." And so a lot of things like that. And I know this sounds terribly selfish, but all of a sudden, sort of the link to the past, the really, really cool things that sort of make the house the home that I remember my parents for, just simply disappeared. Now, having said that, my mom did say, that there was a really, really neat set of dishes that she wanted me to take about 5 years ago, and that was good. But just when I'm talking about things like photo albums, that kind of stuff, it was really distressing to realize that really special gifts that I'd given to them had simply gone in the garbage at some point because they didn't know any better.
And also, you may not have been that involved in their life on a daily basis to even be aware of how severe the disease was at the time.
It's actually interesting you'd say that because, I've got a sister who was there all the time, every day, and I was seeing them once a month, and I think that I actually saw more change than she did. I was able to report more differences because I was seeing them, once a month rather than daily. I think people who didn't see them, who saw them every 6 months would not have seen quite the change. But I could certainly report that. I could say that, yes, I saw that. Last time I was here, they could do this. Now it's worse. That kind of thing.
So you've given us a lot of great advice today, and Dave, a lot of great things to look out for should somebody be in that situation. But is there anything else that you would like to add from your experiences to someone who may be going through a similar experience right now?
The number one thing I would say would be to get help. Basically, understand. And the Alzheimer's Society is actually the outfit that provides that help. Get the information, just so you know how to deal with it. because that's the one failing, I think, that I look back at it now and say, I wish I'd known that. Things that I learned, things that I figured out, say, 3 or 4 years into it, I wish I'd known at the start, because it would have been less frustrating for me and certainly more comfortable for them, because I'd be aware of how to do and how to do some of this stuff. Some of the things I learned about dealing with my parents, I learned by watching the nurses, the care aides, and how they spoke to them, and realizing, there's no sense arguing, just move on, just carry on, agree if you have to, and move on. And I wish I'd known that at the start.
Dave Obie, thank you very much for sharing your story with us, and thank you for being such a great friend of the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia.
Thank you.
Thank you. This is Boomer Life on CL 650, and we're having the conversation about end of life when it comes to dealing with Alzheimer's disease and other dementias. It may not be easy, but it's necessary, and we're here to help. So is the Alzheimer's Society of British Columbia and their friends. We'll be speaking with a palliative care expert next on Boomer Life on CL 650.
Celebrating the baby boomer lifestyle. This is Boomer Life on CL 650.